I'm very happy to welcome the forum participants at our current debate. To begin my current presentation by quoting one of the most renowned modern scientists and the champion of the realistic switch to the new energy sources, Václav Smil. Energy is the universal currency. Without its transformation in any other form, no accomplishments are possible. And that is exactly why the current societies with a high level of energy consumption prefer to use resources with the best possible energy recovery and the fossil fuels in the first place. Energy and progress are inextricable. Throughout the whole history, the higher a human being would climb along the stairs of progress, more energy would be required. The consumption of electric power, the generation of which that will impact the creation and development of this reputation and image, first, we believe, is the need to ensure energy security and commercial efficiency for the sources of energy. Secondly, the fiscal deficits and the avalanche-like growth of the level of government debt, as different countries see it. The demographics of the emerging countries also produces a lot of impact upon the development of the new image of the global energy system within the next 25 countries. Another factor which influences the production of energy as well as the growth population of Asia, Pacific and Africa will grow by 1.4 billion people. Another factor which influences the production of energy as well as the growth of its consumption is the digital revolution with the application of AI and big data. Particular role is played by the electric power, which would need to overcome the growing deficit in India, China, emerging countries, and the gigantic need for electricity in order to provide energy to data centers and heavy industries. The consumption growth will be accompanied by a qualitative growth of labor productivity based upon new technologies. Already now, the level of electricity output in China is more than 2 times exceeds the production of it in US, while 20 years ago, not so long ago, actually, everything was completely other way around. So those who practically will be able to participate in developing the new in also have had overcome unimaginable obstacles and troubles on their journey. The first lines of this poem, written by Homer in the 8th century BC. Oh, you, share with me the story of the experienced man who has been wandering about before he destroyed the holy Troy. Many cities he visited, and so many habits, and suffered in his spirits over the seas, dreaming about bringing back to his home his true friends, but he was not able to save his friends, no matter how hard he tried, who have killed themselves by committing various sins. So these cities' cataclysm don't happen over time. The reasons for them evolve throughout a certain period of time, and then just one push is enough for that to happen. In 1971, the United States demonstrated the government budget deficit, but instead of tightening their belts, they decided to destroy Bretton Woods Agreement and practically announce a default. As a result of giving up of the golden backing for the US dollar, they were able to continuously, as they thought, to fund the growing trade and fiscal deficit without the ability to back the growing debt. Based upon the dollar monopoly, the global financial system, alongside with that, requires additional stability, which back in 1960 was stated by a Belgian-American economist, Robert Triffin. In the dilemma by Triffin, which he formulated, he proved that the functioning of the dollar as the international reserve currency creates continuous deficit of the payment balance in the United States. Its growth, in its turn, leads to an excessive amount of dollars in the world, by this way growing the discrepancies in the global financial system. But something that contradicts the common sense, which is applying dollar as a sanctional tool, undermines its position, creates the prerequisites for the use of alternative instruments such as gold, cryptocurrencies, national currencies in other countries. The decline of the credit rating and the uncertainty of the forecast and the fiscal stability in the United States results in the fact that the American treasuries gradually lose their status of a safe haven, displaced by gold, the price for which, as a rule, grows on the eve of the global crisis. based on the data of the Global World Gold Council, only over the past 3 years, the share of gold in the reserve capacities in the central banks grew by 20 notch points. Based on the recent survey by the Gold Council, 95% of the different central banks plan to increase their share of gold over the next 12 months. A poignant confirmation of this growth is the growth of its relative value. Today, per 1 ounce of gold, you may buy almost 4 times more oil, 9 times more steel, and 35 times more wheat than back in 1950. And by the way, in May this year, the governor of Florida signed the act which recognizes gold and silver as the legal payment mechanism. It grew up to $13.5 trillion over the past year. International trading, the share of yuan in international trade exceeds 6%, catching up with euros. Also, the applications in 2008, the financial sector ended up on the eve of destruction. In order to save it, the world printed the equivalent of $35 trillion As the result of such Western politics, the bigger part of the world currently is hooked up on the debt needle, and the overall debt of the industrial developed countries, including the share of non-government sector, is skyrocketing, reaching 300% of GDPs. Disproportionate growth of the financial sector led us to see that in the United States, the value of financial assets is 5 times greater than GDP. And this trend is characteristic for the majority of the world economy. Even in Russia, the amount of financial assets reaches 100% of GDP. The global economy odyssey includes different attempts to find solutions of the problems accumulated. One of the tools to eliminate these problems of the fiscal deficit in the United States lately have been the trade assets reaches 100% of GDP. The global economy odyssey includes different attempts to find solutions of the problems accumulated. One of the tools to eliminate these problems of the fiscal deficit in the United States lately have been the trade restrictions. However, the risks of the growth of the import duties leads to the destruction of various supply chains, the emergence of a deficit, and subsequently the World Bank downgraded the GDP forecast in the United States down to 1.3%. But for China, it didn't change, so it is expected that the economy this year will grow 4.5%. The difficult situation that the developed countries found themselves in already is reflected in the assessment of their situation that the developed countries found themselves in already is reflected in the assessment of their downgraded the United States from the top rating. Against the growing deficit of interest payments, they funnel out significant resources from social area and defense. Last year, net interest payments on government debt reached $1 trillion, which was 14% of all of the government spending in the U.S., exceeding those for defense and already nearing to the amount of spent because of high level of government debt. The fate of the Habsburg Spain in the 18th century, the monarchic France in 19th, the Ottoman and British Empire in the last century fully confirmed this hypothesis. In the end of the 18th century, the French rulers felt themselves that the fiscal guillotine very quickly may turn into an actual guillotine. By that point in time, France accumulated the amount of debt that to serve it, they had to spend more than half of all of the government appropriations, which led to the growing taxes. And that became one of the big reasons behind the Great French Revolution, because it essentially made this switch from the monarchic republic into the parliamentary. This year, NATO countries started developing the agreement to raise their defense spending up to 5% of GDP by 2035. Nothing without being able to back it with anything that would exacerbate the fiscal situation that they're facing. The United States proposes to its European allies to guarantee the defense spending, while the beneficiary that the American defense industry is, only for that single country, accounts for almost half of the global weapons training. Of course, the U.S. doesn't say that they are eager to lay the defense spending over on the shoulders of their allies. Machiavelli used to say that the strength of power is in its secrecy. The growth of the Western defense industry deflects enormous resources out of manufacturing sectors. For example, to produce one F-35 fighter unit, 417 kilograms of rare earth metals. So it's no surprise that lately there evolved a real hunting spree for such a resource. Only Ukraine, over the past 4 years, signed 3 agreements on the rare earth metals with European Union, UK, and US. But all of these activities, both in the United States and Europe, will hardly be a panacea from it, because there would always be an asymmetric response to it. The digital revolution, with the application of AI and big data, must become the foundation for growth in productivity of labor. As assessed by the Goldman Sachs, the large-scale introduction of high-tech would enable one to increase the labor productivity by 1.5 percentage points for the emerging economies and 1 percentage point, for the developed countries, and 1 percentage point for emerging countries during the next 10 years. But that requires enormous investment in the commodity production, human capital, infrastructure, which in its turn would mean a multiple growth of the consumption of energy. Without any doubt, one of the basic driving forces behind the new tech revolution is the energy industry. So the use of AI on the basis of big data centers represents a high energy intensive process. Based on International Energy Agency, the current electricity requirements for 100 megawatt data center is comparable to the consumption of 100,000 households. In the future, these requirements will grow dozens of times. Such centers will contribute to a big growth in the global demand for electricity. The consumption of this electricity would reach 1,000 terawatt hours, which is comparable to the consumption of this electricity would reach 1,000 terawatt hours, which is comparable to the current consumption in Japan. The level of digitalization impact the global financial system can be clearly seen through cryptocurrencies. Within less than 10 years, it turned into a wholly separate industry, which currently is above that of Poland. Digital revolution opens up a new era in the development of the oil and gas industry, including such as exploration, refining, the data storage and cybersecurity for the industry. Based on expert assessment, the AI market in oil and gas will grow by 83% already by 2030. At this point in time, 49% of this market is within the refining segment. So it is expected that the introduction of AI in exploration will grow at 14% per annum over the next 5 years. Another key driver behind the consumption of energy comes from the emerging economies. One of the biggest reasons behind this is in demographics. It is expected that over the next 25 years, the population in Africa and Asia-Pacific in total will grow by 1.4 billion people in demand for energy. Main changes take care in Africa and Asia. As assessed by IEA, International Energy Agency, within the next 25 years, the number of city people will grow by 1.6 billion people. By 2050, with the consumption of African energy, people will grow by 1.6 billion people. By 2050, with the consumption of African energy, general level of the population of China, in the aggregate additional consumption will be more than 50 million barrels of oil equivalents per day, which equals a quarter of the global consumption. The growth of the consumption of electricity is the key challenge. Already this year, the investment into this industry by 50% will exceed the investment into the fossil fuel development. It is true that during the past 15 years, electricity consumption was growing at an advancing pace, while over the next 25, based on AI estimation, the electricity output will double. The biggest contribution to this growth will come from Asia-Pacific countries, through Indian example, where the peak load on energy system has grown almost by 70% during the past 10 years.
The search for new sources of energy never stopped. For many years, there were a lot of hopes for the use of hydrogen. However, until this moment, less than 1% is what accounts for the low carbon hydrogen of all the volumes produced. According to Deloitte, the introduction and implementation of green hydrogen will cost nearly $10 trillion by 2050, and its cost will vary from $200 to $400 of barrel in oil equivalent. It is clear that under these conditions, hydrogen doesn't, stand any comparison or competition with oil and gas. I would like to emphasize separately production of hydrogen are used. If gray hydrogen is produced, it will still mean that the emissions will be above those that will be the emissions from the production of gasoline. Of course, they are discussing the space, solar energy. We're talking about transformation of the solar energy into electric energy in the space by using a satellite that has batteries, and then it would be wirelessly beamed to the Earth. But the problem is that, according to Roland Berger, a consulting company, a cost of such satellite would be over 30 billion euros, and there is still no technology that would allow us to transmit huge volumes of energy to Earth from space. And as for the storage of energy, a lot of work is being done. Alternative types of batteries are being proposed. For example, the sodium-ion accumulator or battery would reduce the time of charging by 75%. It will have a greater efficiency under low temperatures, but it is still many times lower compared with the existing lithium-ion analogs in energy storage and shelf life. As we see, there's still a long way to go until all of these technologies are implemented. So the optimal solution would be the synthesis of traditional and alternative sources. In the 30s of the last century, the idea of nuclear fusion was formulated, and many scientists, including the Nobel Prize winners Hans Bethe, Peter Kapitsa, Igor Tam, and then Andrei Sakharov. In theory, the nuclear fusion process will allow us to generate 4 million times more energy than the burning and the firing of oil and coal. However, in order to maintain a controlled fusion reaction and improve the coefficient of performance, nevertheless, all types of generation are going through a renaissance. That includes the nuclear energy, and that is illustrated by the price of the uranium fuel, which has grown over the last 7 years more than threefold. Just several years ago, the nuclear power sector was in the deep crisis, and that's because of the companies such as Westinghouse and Areva were not active enough, and they had to go through restructuring and change owners. Over the last 5 years, global investment becoming yet another leader of the nuclear energy, and over the last 10 years, the installed capacity of nuclear generation grew 5 times, is now close to 60 gigawatts. In the next years, China plans to finish construction of more than 32 reactors. It is important to note that as they develop their nuclear industry, China relies on the achievements of all of the leading countries in the nuclear sphere: Russia, the United States, and France. In the second place, in terms of the number of new nuclear projects, is India, with 6 reactors. Russia VVR 1200 Russian reactor is 2 times lower than that of the American AP 1000. Such reactors are already operational in Russia and will be commissioned in friendly countries to Russia. AP 1000 exists only in a few copies. About 5 or 6 of them exist. Special attention should be given to the issue of whether the resource base is there. Only 7 countries, including the Russian Federation, control more than 90% of the global production of uranium fuel and about 70% of the global uranium deposits. Russia is the only country in the world that has competencies in the entire process chain for the nuclear fuel cycle, from the mining of uranium to the disposition of the nuclear fuel. All in all, Russian technologies are used to build 80 nuclear reactors worldwide. The only floating nuclear power plant in the world of smaller capacity was commissioned in Russia. Right now, Russia is in the process of building 4 nuclear power plants. At the same time, our country has been operating for 10 years a nuclear reactor with a sodium coolant, which is a fast neutron reactor, BN 800, and another reactor, fast neutron reactor, is being constructed is BN 1200. The reactors of this type, including the use of fuel elements and the use of the mixed oxide fuel and the use of new structural steels with greater resilience that provide better burn-up of fuel and greater efficiency. In addition, the efficiency ratio of energy generation will be increased by 20-25%, even in the world will grow by nearly 60% to reach 650 gigawatts. But I think this is an underestimation. Just a few weeks ago, the President of the United States set the goal of increasing the generation of nuclear energy in the country 4 times to 400 gigawatts. Investors are increasingly looking at new technologies such as small modular reactors. These reactors are more mobile, and they require investment in the development of the energy distribution grids, and special attention should be given to the issues of their security and safety and protection from terrorist threats. Just recently, Rolls-Royce announced that it won a tender to build such reactors in the United Kingdom. Experts note that these reactors have certain nuances, and one of them is expressed in Ecclesiastes a long time ago. What's crooked cannot be made straight, and what's lacking cannot be counted. None of such reactors has yet been commissioned, so there is nothing to discuss that. It's a moot point. The smaller capacity reactors will require similar amount of effort and cost, because you would have to deal with the issues of fuel disposition and ensuring safety compared to the larger capacity reactors. And of course, nuclear energy is in any case a dual-use technology, and the issues of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons should be given the most acute attention, and some believe that this is the reason for the exacerbation of the Far Eastern the conflict in the Middle East. And it is important to understand whether we want to have the nuclear club expand. Over the last 10 years, cost of the energy transition reached $10 trillion. Over the same period, the share of winter and solar energy in the global energy balance just increased by only 4 percentage points to 6%. According to the IEA, this world alone, the world will invest more than $2 trillion in the development of the so-called clean energy. And this is twofold more than the investment in the fossil fuel, which is still at the level of 80% of energy consumption. The zero level of emissions by 2050 will require more than $180 trillion of investment. In other words, what's excessive is insignificant. Than $180 trillion of investment. In other words, on average, we would be spending more than $7 trillion a year. And even Talleyrand used to say, what's excessive is insignificant. On top of that, regulators in different countries will have to develop, which is very important, common technical standards for working with new sources. It is also important to note that every time when mankind switched to a new type of fuel, effectiveness of the energy systems improved and its capabilities expanded. And that was because, as a rule, had greater density of the energy flux. Piotr Kapitsa proved that the density of the energy flux is a key characteristic for any type of energy, and such types of fossil fuels as fuel, in this sense, has the capacity of 135 watts per square meter, and for oil, that's the value of 195 watts per square meter. For gas, it's 482 watts per square meter. In the case of the nuclear energy, it's at 241 watts per square meter, and this is very much ahead of the solar, which has the capacity of 6.6 watt per square meter, and the wind energy with a value of 1.8 watts per square meter. Therefore, the concept of net zero basically crosses out the hundreds of years of advances in the development of society, offering a regress in energy. However, the European politicians do not have the courage to recognize this fact. They are blindly believing in the green transition, and that is something like dependent. As one French literature classic said, a red nose is a sign of the continuity of character. The French were funny people. Well, it is clear that the integration of the behind the investment in generations. And when we talk about the beneficial investment in green practice, this is something that's confirmed by what the scientists are saying. Large-scale introduction of renewable energy sources will not have expected effect on the climate. American physicists Richard Linson and William Happer. Large-scale introduction of renewable energy sources will not have expected effect on the climate. American physicists Richard Linson and William Happer, in their recently published work, said that the assumed achievement of the net zero in the United States by 2050 will allow us to avoid the assumed achievement of the net zero in the United States by 2050 will allow us to avoid the increase of the temperature by only 0.02 of a Fahrenheit degree, and worldwide that's only 1/1300 of a degree according to Fahrenheit, and that is not. It's based on the assumption that the growth of the concentration of the carbon dioxide destroys the climate. This is subjective. However, recent studies by Western scientists confirmed more recent conclusions made by John Clauser, which is the recent Nobel Prize, about the dominating influence of clouds on the change of climate. Even just the insignificant change in the number of clouds at the height of more than 2,000 meters can several percent increase the heating of the Earth's surface by sun rays. One of the ideas is that the ice cover is shrinking. However, recent studies by Chinese scientists have shown that since 2021 through 2023, the Antarctic has seen that the ice mass is growing, and that time-proven traditional sources of energy. Otherwise, this will disrupt energy security. From the historic standpoint, transition to new types of fuel never led to full refuse of using existing sources of energy. On the contrary, the result was the growth of a competition between different types of fuel, and you would choose what is most effective. Fuel is still the largest source of electrical energy in the world, and the second largest source of energy, with the share of 25% in the global energy mix. The demand for this type of fuel last year broke a record. It's 8.8 billion tons, and the International Agency have once again had to reconsider their expectations for the peak of its demand. Since the moment the Kyoto Protocol was signed in 1997, consumption of coal in the world grew by 75%, and after the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, it grew by 15% more. A unique example of a very reasonable approach to developing the energy system is China. That accounts for 1/3 of global investment in the energy sector. Please pay attention to this slide. According to my assessment, China has already assured its energy security, and it is moving towards full energy independence by developing a sustainable energy balance that relies on its own resources. There is no doubt, given the resilience and persistence and professionalism of our Chinese colleagues and comrades, that they will be able to achieve the result that they seek, which will turn China from an importer of energy into a large exporter of energy. As of now, this country has become a recognized global leader in renewable energy sources. Over the recent years, it was China where we saw the most number of new capacities introduced, where more than 70% of global capacity to produce equipment for the green economy is concentrated. This applies to the entire value chain, from the critically important minerals to the production of the high-technology equipment that doesn't have any analogs in the Western countries. In trying to assure the reliable operation of its energy system, China is ramping up its investment in the adjacent energy infrastructure. Investment in the energy grids have increased by 15% last year. And this year, this growth rate will double. The investment in batteries grew by 5% and reached $11 billion. And right now, the overall capacity of such batteries in China is over 35 gigawatts, which is 2/3 of all global capacity. At the same time, China never stopped using fossil fuel over the last 5 years. This country outstripped the rest of the world in terms of the number of new capacities commissioned for coal generation. Right now, the share of coal in the production of energy in China is over 60%. Just last year, China produced licenses for construction of more than 100 gigawatts worth of new coal generation, and China's efforts to improve their energy security are often criticized. Sometimes they're masked as care for the economy. As the strategist and thinker Sun Tzu said more than 2,500 years ago, the more genius your plan is, the less people will be in agreement with that. The new energy strategy of China is quite well seen using the example of e-vehicles. The growth in their sales had led to the slowdown of the demand for the motor fuel last year, and the continuation of this trend will have a negative trend on the balance of the oil market. And of course, a part of the Chinese strategy is to reduce its dependency on imports of energy. And to do that, they want to convert coal into synthetic fuel using the advances in their chemical industry. And the Chinese invest in billions of dollars into that. Right now, 40 million tons of coal are used to produce synthetic fuel and more than 260 million tons to produce methanol and ammonia. I would also like to inform you that Rosneft just stopped developing its own technologies and catalysts in the entire chain of the GTL process, gas-to-liquid process. We have gotten patents for all parts of this process. We want to introduce and implement this technology on the peninsula of Timor at a new province of ours where we produce oil and gas. And now I would like to demonstrate to you the results of the work we've done. This is a synthetic oil that is comprised of the purest molecules of hydrocarbons with zero concentration of sulfur. And everyone who are interested in this, you could take a look at the samples. We're ready to provide those. But please don't smoke. Many expect India to experience explosive growth of demand for energy, and they are at the threshold of selecting their own model of energy consumption. We see a lot of interest there in that country towards coal and the nuclear generation. This year alone, they want to restore the work of more than 30 coal mines, and they want to start 5 new projects to mine coal, and 6 new nuclear reactors are being built, as I said earlier. According to the plans of the Ministry of Energy of India, India is going to build by 2032 at least 80 gigawatts of additional coal capacity, which is a growth of more than 1/3 compared to the current 2018 gigawatts, and will require about $80 billion of investment. These new capacity will cover about 1/4 of the anticipated increase of consumption in the United States, where consumption of energy has restarted its growth after a decade of stagnation. The new administration is already rethinking its energy strategy, and the President Trump has recently signed a number of orders that may aim to restore the coal industry of the United States, and they relaxed regulation, and they've increased and improved their forecast for the American mining of coal this year by 6%. And since subsidies for the green energy are being repealed, it shows that this country, unlike the European Union, is going back to the pragmatic policy. And in Europe, as a result, the cost of energy is 5 times more than in the United States.
Which was originally stated by the U.S. administration was very promising, but most of the promises given and commitments haven't been done. The tariff wars led to the decline in the oil prices, but the taxes for the industry remain at the same level while the interest rates don't go down. Against this as a backdrop, the number of active drilling rigs over the past 2 months went down by 9% to 439 ones, and the oil output has stopped. Less than a year, the DOE reduced its forecast for the oil production in the U.S. by the end of 2025 by 400,000 barrels a day. Against the current prices, the oil production in the U.S., I believe, has reached its peak. This is the view that has recently been announced by the Dalman Beck, Minister of the Department of Energy, Christopher Wright, expects a significant slowdown in drilling activity in the second half of this year, which would lead to a reduction in the drilling fleet by additional 10%. It's not surprising that with this in the background, that maybe many shale assets started reducing their investments. Based on the recent IEA estimate this year, for the first time during the 5 years, the global investment into the E&P will go down by 6%. In the US, it's going to be 10. So I think this is just the beginning. The new head of the U.S. Treasury, Scott Bessent, said it more than time that for the success of the second presidential term, the new administration requires the oil output growth in the level of 3 million barrels a day. And that is part of the plan that he announced, 333, which also calls for the reduction of the budget deficit in the U.S. down to 3% of the GDP and the achievement of the 3% growth with that. With regard to the barrels, what difference does it make for the American market where those barrels are going to come from? Quite possibly, this could be the barrels produced in the OPEC Plus countries. The alliance very consistently since the end of last year has been talking about the need to grow production because of the changes in consumption. The stated increase of the output since May this year is 3 times greater than the original plan. Apart from it, the whole of the output growth can be brought earlier by 1 year. The decisions made by the OPEC leaders to do it today look quite far-reaching. And from the point of view of the market, well justified considering the consumer interest in the light of uncertainties in terms of the Iran Israeli conflict. Low oil prices are quite good and that the U.S. consumers accepted because the gasoline prices went back to the level of 2019 is not accidental. That happens against an active Middle Eastern policy and an agreements with many key regional powers. But despite the stated growth in output, there is no excessive oil in the market long term, because the global oil reserves currently find themselves at the minimum levels over the past 5 years. I would like to specifically note that the European Union continues the attempts to pressure down the oil caps for Russia at $45 per barrel. I believe that the real target for them is to justify the efficiency of their purchasing of oils rather than to reach them. From the start of 2023, Europe bought more than $20 billion worth of Russia oil, becoming the 4th biggest buyer. Quite obviously, the United States won't agree with the price decline promoted by the Europeans because it will negatively impact the profitability of oil exports from the U.S. Actually, the imports of dark Russian petroleum products since the start of the sanctions enables Saudi Arabia to effectively meet the needs of its energy industry without the detriment for the exports. The amount of vacuum gas oil and mazout more than 6 times was greater than the amount of the supplies back 4 years ago. A similar approach is being entertained today by India, and the Indian refinery is the biggest one in terms of the purchases of the Russian oil during the past 3 years. Actually, they doubled the exports of oil refined products to Europe. In order to balance the budgets, many producing countries, they need the oil price, which is much higher than the current levels. Based on the International Monetary Fund, will allow many companies to preserve the previous level of dividend payout. The restored energy experts believe that if the global measures keep the shareholders' payments this year, they will have to give up on investments or grow sufficient debts. The price decline already impacts major players. BP and Chevron reduced their share buyback by 60%. I mean, BP 60%, Chevron 30%, while Aramco has to grow its debt in order to be able to pay dividends. Russia, Venezuela, and Iran are the key players in the energy market. From the supplies there, from the global energy security is dependent. They account for the 1/3 of the hydrocarbons reserves and 50% of the global production. Without their resource base, it is impossible to move over to a new image of global energy. The real contribution by Russia to the global economy is proportional to its share in the global resource balance. The share of Russia in the global exports of hydrocarbons accounts for about 15%. However, the Russian resource base has sufficient reserves of hydrocarbons and metals. Russia's share in golden production is 10% in such metals as high-grade nickel and palladium reserves of the rare earths, metals without which it is impossible to develop modern technologies. The Russian economy finds itself in an unprecedented sanctional pressure. However, despite many negative forecasts during this period, it was able to establish its perseverance over the past 2 years. The GDP growth exceeded the average global ones. As deemed by the Minister of Finance of Russia, the federal budget remains a well-balanced one. While the level of government debt is very much under control. The banking system demonstrates stability, higher yield of the federal treasuries, which makes it possible to work with efficiency. But we expect it to increase this contribution not only to the fiscal system, but also to the national economy. And the high dividend payments to benefit the government would have been a common sense step, which would help to eliminate budget risk and would help others to consider various stimuli in order for the economy to grow further. Let's go back to the start of our discussion. Having found the Golden Fleece, the Argonauts went back to Greece. However, they never were able to feel happy. But what kind of sense is this myth when good intentions transform into a complete opposite? Maybe the Golden Fleece, which was possessed in criminal ways, never brings happiness. Evil always brings evil. No magic will happen, despite the fact that our dream about the global economy and the robust laws that we follow in terms of the contract commitments, the equal legal warranties to everybody, turn into an illusion against the unprecedented external pressures, repeating great words pronounced in the June of 1941, which symbolized the indestructible spirit of the Russian people. We are doing the right cause, and the victory will be ours. Thank you very much for your attention.
Igor, you told me the other day that your speech would be filled with truth bombs. Well, speaking at least for myself, it has been mind-blowing. You know, in many ways, I must share this as I was listening. The responsibility, what behooves us now to do, is to try and drill down on this by having some of the more formidable speakers who are here with us today to share some of their, as we follow up on this conversation. And we'd like to start, young man here up on stage, the chairman of the board of directors of, he'll understand that, the chairman of the board of directors of Rosneft Oil Company, the distinguished Mohammed bin Saleh Al Sada. And I'll start my questioning to you.
And quick points emphasizing some of the valuable insights given by Mr. Sechin. I would like to shed light on the hydrocarbon energy sector, and that could very much lead to the possibility of energy shortage. Give you an example. For this year, it is estimated that $2.2 billion is injected into renewables. Only half of that amount is forecasted to be injected into the fossil fuels. Now, that is not enough, and the world needs more energy, more of primary energy, and this is not enough. In fact, I also am picking it up from the speech of Mr. Sechin, is my comment on, and personally for the last 20 years or so, are we really transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables? As His Excellency mentioned, the total source of energy today we are using. Your Excellency, this figure is the same over the last 20 years. We have been hovering around the 80% fossil fuel source. So nothing has changed much. This is one issue, transitioning from hydrocarbons, because the world needed And it's not luxury to have it, but it is mandatory to have it and to have it in an adequate supply to augment and maintain the well-being of humanity and its economy. So,
we are about to hear President of Venezuela by video, Delcy Rodriguez.
Muy buenos días desde Venezuela. Saludamos en nombre del presidente.
The participants of the forum and of this event that to zero emissions, our vision, our strategy should become a reality so that we can ensure energy fairness and justice for all. There are a lot of challenges and threats in energy. Geopolitical ones come to the forefront. Illegal sanctions against producing countries are included in that list. 27% of global production are under sanctions, illegal sanctions, which undermine, of course, the ability to ramp up investment. The other topic I want to focus on is how can we stop the hegemony of the dollar currencies. That's what we are all thinking about. Another important aspect is observance of the principles of the UN Charter. Right now, a member of the OPEC and the OPEC Plus is a victim to illegal acts of aggression from Israel. And that is, of course, will have a negative impact on energy security and on the global energy market. We need to go down the path of diplomacy, dialogue, meetings and discussions between producers and of producing mining hydrocarbons to reduce emissions and take them to zero. We have the trilemma: energy security, fairness, and reducing impact on the environment.
I want to introduce the gentleman right here to my left. It's an honor, in fact, to be able to bring him into the discussion for us here. He is the Vice President of China's National Petroleum Company, CNPC, and I will ask Zhang Daowei.
Thank you very much, dear moderator. Numbers, the trade in hydrocarbons in the context of our comprehensive cooperation is an important, it is something that helps develop a comprehensive model of energies and to provide all of the answers. But we are concerned for the energy security of our country, and we do this by developing our country in a synergetic way. We are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We want to achieve carbon neutrality, and we strive to develop new technologies. These are the three factors, and adjusting it as necessary. Today, new sources of energy, solar, wind, and other alternative energy sources have been showing active growth in the system of our economies, and this is also going to be one of the drivers of our growth.
And to do that, my next question will be directed to PMS Prasad. He is the Executive Director of Reliance Industries.
With 7 to 8% annual GDP growth expected through 2050, taking its GDP from $4.3 trillion in 2024 to $25 trillion is not possible without affordable energy. Renewables such as solar, wind, and bioenergy, and nuclear is the key to ensuring baseload stability while advancing cleaner alternatives. Gas, friends, India is not choosing between energy access and innovation. It is integrating both. By developing scalable, context-specific solutions, it is addressing local priorities while contributing meaningfully towards global sustainability. From rural microgrids to energy-efficient data centers, India is turning its scale into a strategic asset. In this broader effort, international partnerships play a vital role. Energy remains a key cornerstone of that strategic relationship between India and Russia. India greatly values this trusted partnership and deeply appreciates the collaboration built over decades. The leadership of both the countries.
As we move around the globe here, my next question is to the President and the Chief Executive Officer of Pertamina, Indonesia. How does your company see the optimal balance between traditional energy sources and renewable energy sources?
First of all, I would like to express my highest appreciation for being part and invited in this prestigious event. That's why in Pertamina, we have a dual growth strategy, focusing on strengthening both on our core business in traditional energies and also accelerating the development of low carbon solutions. Right now, at the center of our strategy for a cleaner transition fuel, and now we are expanding our LNG capabilities both for domestic and export needs. We are also aggressively investing in clean energy technologies, and we are focused on the indigenous resources that we have in Indonesia. One of them is geothermal. Indonesia has the second largest geothermal resources in the world.
Our next question to the gentleman representing the Republic of Uzbekistan, Mirza Makhmudov, Minister of Energy from the Republic of Uzbekistan. Dear Minister, in recent years, your country has been actively modernizing its energy sector. We want to know, in this context, cooperation with Russia has played an important role in the nuclear and gas sectors in particular, as well as in hydropower, oil trade, oil products.
Presence of Uzbek delegation here is a representative that we're cooperating, will cooperate. We're installing, developing hydro. And with the increasing share of the renewables, we now start installing battery storage systems as well. Now we're discussing hydropower pump storage as well. So we're looking for all other directions. And for the long term, we're looking to implement a nuclear project together with Rosatom. Demography was mentioned a lot. We're adding 1 million people every year. So economy is growing more than 6%. For example, this year in 5 months, that's why we're now importing natural gas. We're importing other hydrocarbons, including oil products, including from Rosneft as well. So we are very thankful, and we believe this cooperation will continue.
That's impressive. That's impressive. Now, from an academic standpoint, to better explain to us, this question is directed to Alexander Dinkin.
In other words, geopolitics is a factor of the global economy of the 21st century, whether we want it or not. But geopolitics is also a trap for the European Union and for Germany, especially after Trump's coming to power. European elites are begging the big brother to go back to the head of the table and promise in return to increase their defense expenses. But now, about 70% of all weapon systems are being bought by the Europeans from American corporations. Therefore, and yet another channel for moving European resources, converting them into the income of American defense contractors. From my point of view, this is the second time when the European Union is tripping the same wire and making the same mistake politically, and not economically motivated green transition basically failed. But the huge governments are Chinese companies. Right now, China is an absolute leader in the production of wind turbine, and the energy mutual complementarity of Russia and the US could improve diversification of supply routes. But the logic of the Euro bureaucrats is different. They want to sever their ties from Russia's energy supplies by 2027. They are not being stopped by the growth of cost.
to the chairman now of the supervisory board of ICEF, Innovation for a Cool Earth Forum. We take you to Japan for an opportunity to ask this question of Nobuo Tanaka. And the question is the following. The growing importance of electricity, see the solution to the energy trilemma which the world is currently facing. The need to strike a balance between energy security, environmental sustainability, and energy availability all at the same time.
Geopolitical situation in the energy market is totally difficult and unpredictable. For example, due to the war between Iran and Israel, the oil and gas market is getting very hot. President Trump has made the global economy very unpredictable, but Israel's attack on Iran made it much worse. The international energy security has always been the diversification of supplies and sources, or energy efficiency and development of alternative energy such as renewables, nuclear, and very well-functioning market and predictable and stable policies. I remember, Mr. Sechin, that we did a forecast of oil prices last year at the Energy Summit. I said oil price would be lower $60 per barrel, and I understand that you agreed. This year, I'm afraid to say that price would be over $100 due to the Middle East crisis coming.
We commented earlier on some of the truth bombs that you were heard throughout this session, and you just heard a bevy of them right there. As Igor had told me earlier, he said there's a lot of truths that are going to be told during the session that you may not hear in other places. It certainly has been the case. My next question to David Gajimir Zaev about the production projects that are currently underway in the Arctic zone. As many of you know, Vostok Oil, one of the largest new oil projects in the entire world. The implementation of such projects requires the Russian oil field service companies in solving such large-scale tasks as what we're seeing there in this unbelievable and really cool part of the world.
The Vostok Oil strategic project. And I would like to start by saying that the Russian oil service company do feel very sure of themselves, despite all of the expectations amongst the Western countries. We're not only very robustly standing where we are, but also moving forward, which is testified by the result that we've been able to achieve within the Vostok Oil project. Literally, since 2022, we've been able to extend the horizon length 3 times. We were able to speed up the drilling by 25%, which means that our technologies do work, that we possess a great amount of experience. It shows that this country has the necessary expertise, and the Vostok Oil project represents the future of the country. The reason I'm saying it is because we do ascertain that all the technologies that are being tested, piloted, and are being applied in the project do represent the future technologies which will build the foundation for the next 10-year development in this country, specifically to be able to innovate. So we're very much hopeful, but once again, I can tell you with certainty that we'll be able to do it. The results speak for themselves.
Sounds exciting. It really does. I mean, it's like what was that? What did they say in Star Trek? A new frontier. It's like a new frontier. It really is. It really is a game changer, it seems. A round of applause for all of the speakers who shared, say, in Cuba, El Maestro. I guess El Maestro, right? El Maestro. I'd like to go back to Igor Ivanovich, and I'd like to pose a question to you, sir, about a future. What does the Russian energy sector of the future look like?
the trends that we have defined, that we have debated, they are characteristic for this particular image in Russia and for our industry in the Russian Federation, which is the diversification of sources, reserve, the renewable energy, new technology, as well as the application of the whole synthesis that we have in terms of our opportunity mix, the fossil fuel. That is the key notion. But there are very peculiar characteristics which create exceptional conditions for our future development, which is, in the first place, political stability, a gigantic resource base, and talented people. And I would like to take the opportunity and mention the greetings received from Tanaka-san and wish him good health. And on my part, comment upon his price forecast. He assumes that this year, considering the volatility, may rise up to $100 per barrel. You know, no matter what it is, it's quite cumbersome to predict what might happen. Nobody knows. I can remind you that Machiavelli, the strength of the powers that there are in its secrecy, because we don't know what kind of geopolitical factors might come into play over the market. So no matter what it is, our company, Rosneft, and as far as its business plan for this year is concerned, puts in 45. For the next one, 42, 43. We don't want to be depending upon this volatility. Thank you so much for your participation in this excellent discussion. Everyone should stay healthy. Thank you.
And my thanks to you, Igor, and my thanks to all of you and our staff of Rosneft and Igor, for all of you for being here on this panel.